"What is freedom?" a teacher asked her class. "It's when you can leave home and go wherever you want and do whatever you want and your parents can't tell you what to do," a child replied. "But what if you get hungry? Are you now free to starve?" "I would go home," the child says. We are not free, nor have we ever been. Perfect freedom demands a perfect vision of reality, one too painful for the healthy to endure. It requires that we be alive, alert, and exquisitely aware of our raw being. Faced with the pain of freedom, man begs for his shackles. Afraid of death, he seeks the stultifying boundaries of religion. Afraid of loneliness, he imprisons himself in relationships. Afraid of want, he accepts the bondage of employment. Afraid of rejection, he conforms to the commands of society. If our knowledge of freedom were perfect, we would not choose it. Pure freedom is pure terror. When we care for another, when we make room for another's wants and needs, we have lost an equal portion of our freedom, but in the bargain we are freed of loneliness. When we take on marriage and a family, we are bound by our vows, the law, and our moral commitments to spouse and child, but our bargain frees us of detachment and meaninglessness. When we live in the country, we can drive our trucks across the prairies, but when we join a community, we cannot drive our cars across our neighbors' lawns. In short, when we join into any relationship, our dues are always paid in freedom. Robert Frost understood freedom and expressed its essence in the metaphor, "Freedom is when you are easy in the harness," he wrote. Easy in the harness. I used to sit behind a team of good horses, Star and Spiffy, and for weeks together every year we mowed the meadow hay. I liked to touch the horses, to feel their softer-than-velvet noses against my cheek. I liked their smell. I loved old Star and Spiffy. One spring when I returned to the ranch, I found Star and Spiffy gone. Nobody wanted to talk about it. "They're just gone," the old rancher said. "But where?" I asked. "Gone," was all he would say, and the way he said it with such finality made it clear that was to be the end of it. Later I learned that each fall a horse buyer visited the neighborhood ranches to buy the ranchers' worn-out old nags. They brought a few cents a pound for dog meat. As I look back on it, the horses were as easy in their harnesses as we, and their deaths were perhaps better than our own. I could see in my mind's eye the old team being shipped off, but it was only another ride to them. They were not being trucked to their execution. Their bellies were not gripped with fear. There was no sadness, no regrets. And as the truck rumbled down the highway toward the slaughterhouse, the fall air must have blown through their manes and made their sad, old, tired eyes water. And they must have felt joy. Every day we spend our freedom like careless children with too many pennies. In exchange for acceptance by our friends, we give up the right to say what we think. Being socially proper is more important than possessing a fresh, uncompromised soul. Being acceptable to our neighbors is often more important than being acceptable to ourselves. But the price of freedom is often rejection, even banishment. I knew an old rancher who lived on the Wind River in Wyoming. People didn't have much good to say about old Jack. His chief crime was that he told the truth as he saw it and laughed at things we were all afraid to laugh at. Every once in a while I'd stop by to see him. He was usually in his garden. That day he was hoeing his corn, a special hybrid variety he had developed for our short growing season. "Well, what has God wrought today?" I asked, knowing full well my question would engender a strong response. "You talking about me?" he replied. "I'm my own God." "Jack, aren't you afraid of going to hell for saying such irreligious things?" "There ain't no hell 'cept on earth." He went on hoeing. His shirt was wet with good, fresh summer sweat. "Suppose God heard you say that," I said. "What if he condemned you to burn in hell for an eternity for such heresy?" I'd been introduced to such horrors as a child in Sunday school. No just God would condemn you for using the power of reason he give you, he said. And the idea of hell is plumb unreasonable. He stopped, leaned on his hoe handle, and squinted at me. Besides, who would want to worship a God that sent your ass to hell forever for such a trifling transgression as not believing something that's unreasonable? That would be no just God. And if he ain't just, I don't want nothing to do with him. The old boy was well past 80, and he knew that by all odds his days were numbered. "How you been feeling, Jack?" I asked, trying to change the subject. "Feel just pretty perfect," he said. Then he went back to hoeing. "But I may not make it another winter." The following spring I stopped by. He was on his hands and knees planting beans in his garden. "I see you made it through another winter." "Yep," he said. "See you done the same." "God willing," I said. "God didn't have nothing to do with it," he said. "How come you're so tough on God?" I asked. "On account of these kind of ideas hurt a lot of innocent folks," he said. He never looked up from his planting while he talked. "Christ taught that love is the supreme law, but they got it all mixed up. I got a lot of neighbors that love God and hate each other. I say if you're going to love, you ought to love something you can see. Say your neighbor, for instance." He had radical ideas for his time. For example, his views on birth control, about which he spoke often and freely. "This here earth is overrun with people. The multitudes is starving everywhere. Now, when I can't feed no more cows on this little ranch, I sure don't raise no more calves. There ain't no starving calves here," he said. "So how come my cows has got better rights than people? What kind of a God would want you to raise up kids to starve? Why, them church-going neighbors of mine claim to love the fetus in the womb, but as soon as the kid is born, they say it's all right if it's left to starve. I never could figure out why little kids who never done nothing to nobody should be punished by being sentenced to starve to death for no worse crime than being born in the first place." When he looked at me, I never saw a kinder set of eyes. I never knew a more honest man. I never knew a man who was more free than old Jack. Sometimes when I think of old Jack, I realize how unfree I am, how afraid, how timid and intimidated, and how the bargains I make sometimes leave me feeling cheated, how I sometimes trade honest convictions for silence to gain acceptance by those around me. Yet in the end, I doubt that my neighbors love me any more than Jack's loved him. They respected him, that much I know, and maybe Jack valued their respect more than their love. Yet respect and love are sometimes hard to separate. Jack's neighbors all came to his funeral, and some who had been his most severe critics had tears in their eyes. I doubt that Jack would have been surprised. I think he knew. They buried old Jack behind his garden where he wanted, close to the creek. As they lowered the pine box into the ground, I could hear his creaky old voice arguing away. "Why, Spence," he said, "we kick our dogs if they crap in the house, but we crap all over this beautiful planet like a herd of hogs suffering from terminal diarrhea. Baby owls are smarter than that. You never seen a baby owl that ever fouled its nest. These human beings ain't too smart a species." And I thought, well, Jack, your old bones won't pollute this little plot behind your garden, that's for sure. Next spring you'll turn into fresh buds on the cottonwood trees. Maybe you won't think that's too bad a place to be. Maybe that's eternity after all. Earth to earth. "Beats hell out of hell," I could hear old Jack reply. And then I turned away before the neighbors could catch up with me to tell me all about how old Jack was. One thing I knew. Old Jack was free. Always had been. Domestication has been the specialty of man from the beginning. Man domesticated the wolf into the dog, the wild cat into the lap pussy, the wild horse into the plow horse, the wildebeest into the Hereford and the Holstein. He has also been busy domesticating himself. Yet something about servitude stills. Something about domestication stifles. The wolf, now the poodle, no longer howls. The wild boar lies on its side in the hog pen, and grunts. The wildebeest stands in her stall placidly chewing her cud while she's milked dry. Domestication of man and beast muffles the cry of freedom and suffocates the spirit of liberty. I think of the wars that have been fought, allegedly for freedom. More often the blood and suffering and death were sacrificed so that massively powerful moneyed interests might remain free to use us up in our harnesses. I think of the endless list of the dead who were said to have given their lives so that we might be free. But after the wars, nothing much changed. As usual, we arose every morning, slipped into our harnesses, plodded to our work, and believed we were free. Then we died. We all wear our harnesses, and if we are easy in them, if we feel free, is not the illusion of freedom as satisfactory as freedom itself? Should we fret over our servitudes, petty or grand, when the fictions of freedom we embrace often serve as satisfactorily? Is not a shackled slave who cannot see or feel his chains as free as if he had no chains at all? Should we free the happy slave and cast him into the chaos and horrors of pure freedom? Indeed, have we not at last achieved the prediction of brave new world in which Aldous Huxley observed that, quote, the really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude, unquote. Freedom, that sweet bondage, as Shelley called it, is a marvelous thing in small doses. Not to be afraid of our government is blessed. Not to be lied to, not to be cheated, not to be exploited and poisoned and hurt for corporate greed, not to be used up like old rags, to be heard, to be respected, to grow, and to discover our uniqueness. These are the freedoms we most cherish. Freedoms we, by reason of our occupancy of this earth, are entitled to enjoy. Yet most of our freedoms lie within. As the poem goes, stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars the cage. Most freedom cannot be given, except as we give it to ourselves. I think of old Jack, who cherished his freedom above all. He is at last free, totally free, since freedom, by common definition, is a condition in which the individual may do what he wants. And since the dead have no wants, they are they not, totally free? And I think of old Starr and Spiffy and of their freedom. Were I as successful as free? Were I able to mow the meadows of my life and live by my own work as well? Were I able to remove the harness from within? Such is freedom. And when finally the legs have given out, when the bones are old and brittle and crooked, and at last the shoulders too crippled to pull the load, I should hope that on the way to wherever it is that old horses and old men go, I feel the wind through my hair, and that my eyes do not water from tears, but from having felt the joy of the trip to the last and the only freedom. Every day we observe a chilling scene. We see the breathing dead who believe they are alive. Year after year, these breathing dead get up at the same time every morning on the same side of bed, trudge to the same kitchen, swallow the same brand of bacon and style of eggs, drive the same route to work, and wearily enter the same door of employment. There they automatically punch the same time clock and perform like machines the same mindless task until the same bell goes off at 5 o'clock. Then by rote they return home in order to open the same brand of beer and to watch the news on television that informs them of the same murders and the same violence, which are balanced against the same insipid sitcoms evoking the same canned laughter. The breathing dead emulate machines. Their work is mechanical. They relate more to the simulated life on television than to their own species. It's safer to love the electronic image, safer to engage a non-being. Moreover, the control of their television sets provides a power they do not possess in life. The power of the thumb that clicks from electronic life to electronic life, and the power to extinguish such life at will. The bargain seems fair. By relinquishing their own lives, which can be petty, puny, and powerless, they acquire a non-life over which they can exercise complete and final power. Mankind strikes an unholy bargain at birth. The contract reads, "Give me life, and I will agree to death." The first freedom, therefore, is the freedom to live in the face of the fear of living and the terror of dying. But such freedom extracts a severe price. The price is pain, the pain of fear, fear of failure, of rejection, fear of abandonment, of loss and sorrow, and the terror of death. We awaken to find ourselves trapped on a boat floating down an uncharted river with its horrible falls at the end. We possess no map to tell us where we shall face the falls, but we know the falls are there. We know no one ever survives the trip. We are afraid, yet we cannot get off the river. Life is the invisible trap, and the invisible tyrant is fear. To many, escape is death, living death. The trap of the breathing dead is worse than the trap of the coyote whose foot is caught in steel jaws. For the coyote can escape. He need only chew off his foot. But the trap that ensnares the breathing dead tortures beyond endurance, because the trap cannot be seen, or touched, or even understood. Such traps have no measurable dimensions. When the breathing dead cry out that they are trapped, they are assured that all they need do is work harder, be smarter, compete harder, make more money, and they will at last be freed. Who are these breathing dead? The farmer can be trapped on the farm, trapped by the mortgage that renders him the slave of the banks. The housewife can be trapped behind lifeless, monotonous walls, reduced to slavery to husband and offspring and repressive community mores. The poet trapped in anonymity, the small-town artist trapped in obscurity, the parent trapped in mindless labor, the child trapped in ignorance and stifled in the great negative mind mill, all can die in their traps before they have lived. For all creatures who are caught in traps, a sense of hopelessness prevails. At the workplace, the breathing dead are not heard, not acknowledged. They are digits on the balance sheet, and digits are dead. Their protests are like screaming into the void. They cannot be freed. At last, the trap becomes synonymous with life. But the state of non-being in being becomes the supreme pain, for eventually it embodies the realization that one has been cheated of his bargain. The breathing dead witness the murder of themselves. Alcohol becomes the palliative of choice for the breathing dead. Beer is associated with happiness and is subliminally marketed in place of friendship, as a substitute for love, for sex, especially sex, so that those who thereby escape life through its brown bottled bubbles are delivered a replacement for genuine joy, and by dulling the senses are delivered a certain quantum of pseudo-death. It provides an escape from what appear to be the inescapable traps of life, but the escape is not into the experience of life, but the experience of non-life. So, too, with drugs. The deadly consequences of food, the most widely abused substance of the breathing dead, are visible in the bloated bodies of the masses and reflect a nation of the entrapped. The breathing dead force-feed themselves and their children until their guts are distended and their limbs made heavy and stiff like the dead. Hawking substitutions for living has become a massively profitable mega-business in America. We are provided a love affair with Murphy Brown in order that the sponsor's goods may be subliminally sold in the process. At the same time, we are sold sports cars for sexual potency, shaving lotion for sexual appeal, and shampoo for beauty. Spectator sports provide a substitute for our involvement with our own bodies. Pornography provides an alternative for living relationships. And the pornographic experience mimics necrophilia. Since the coupling is with non-living images on non-living pages, or non-living screens. Any commodity that separates people from their lives is in great demand. Television removes the audience from reality. There the mind is redesigned by the electronic god that teaches false wisdom, that human worth is measured by the amount of money each possesses, that human fulfillment is measured by the numbers of dead objects, gadgets, and things money can buy. The breathing dead sell their lives an hour at a time to acquire the means by which to buy the stuff of their living death. And when the breathing dead are worn out, like the machinery they mimic, they are written off, cast out, and replaced. The offspring of the breathing dead are also trapped. Taught by the dead, they learn to say no, not yes to life. To say no, not yes to self-expression and exploration. At school, good becomes synonymous with dead. At school, most children are not permitted to laugh out loud or cry or make a commotion because too often dead teachers despise any expression of life. The children's primary experiences, those experiences by which they will make their life's choices and establish their life's values, are not related to clear fishing streams meandering through pristine woods, but to the blood and death and emptiness of life they experience on television. Mindless encounters on the screen waste their lives and dribble away their opportunity for growth. They are forbidden to explore their feelings, for feelings are too dangerous. Their language is not the language of poets, but the lexicon of computers. Their heroes are machines and robots, and those who emulate the same. They relate more to machines than to peers, to video contraptions that suck in quarters and simulate killing, to driving machines that suck in vast quantities of fuel and carry them endlessly up and down the same streets in a compulsive search for Lord knows what, and to sound machines that in quadruple stereo and exploding subwoofers destroy the ears and deaden the senses. As are their parents, the offspring of the breathing dead are trapped in the decaying concrete canyons and bowels of the cities. There these concrete children, like rats stacked 3 deep in a concrete shoebox, begin to strike out. They hurl themselves against the walls, but they cannot escape. At last, desperate to escape, the concrete children can only break out through their desperate, fragile selves. Like the coyote in the trap, they begin to gnaw on themselves. Crack, cocaine, violence. Escape is everything. Freedom is everything. In their madness, the concrete children attack their neighbors. The regime calls it crime. But it is only the concrete children searching for freedom. In a vicious, ever-widening cycle that will surely destroy us, the regime punishes the children by imprisoning them in even smaller, viler boxes of concrete called penitentiaries. We witness a true revolution. It is a revolution against the dead, the living dead. It is a revolution being waged against a dead regime. Dead, for its core is composed of a conglomerate of dead corporate and governmental bureaucracies. A dead regime fears its living subjects, for the dead cannot control the living. Only religions have such power. And when the living become the living dead, the equation is placed in balance, for indeed the dead can control the dead. Thus freed, the regime, like an enormous malignant glacier, blankets the earth to pursue its purpose, namely to convert all that is living to the dead, to convert clear skies to poisonous dead skies, pristine forests to dead clear cuts, sparkling rivers and emerald oceans to deadly ooze and toxic silt. The regime characterizes its action as progress, but the regime's progress is its malignant magic. To transform all that breathes, all that grows, all that is green into dead green money. Fearing the living, the dead regime seeks to confine the concrete children in concrete. But the regime cannot build enough prisons. In the great cities, cities too bombed and broken to fix, the masses swarm. There a bursting discontent, a swelling anxiety, maddens the alienated hordes. Anger is as thick in the air as the heavy, noxious gases. The people breathe in anger and spew it out. They no longer kill each other out of hate. They kill each other because life has been reduced. Life is nothing, theirs or their neighbors, and therefore killing is nothing. Killing has become a non-act. In the cities where the concrete children terrorize us and themselves, we observe the species now reverted to its raw state of predator and prey. But it is a living predator against a living prey. The dead regime cannot say as much. Under its power, the dead consume the living. In the cities, the concrete children are both the hunters and the hunted. Despite their envelopment in this desperate meaninglessness, only the living can eventually care for the living. Once more, the dead regime cannot say as much, for under its power the living are and always will be but lifeless expendables. In the concrete jungle, life is vibrant, pulsing, grimy, painful, and dangerous. Fear is the predominant human experience, but the concrete children experience a life that denounces living death, even more than death itself. As the great cities collapse, the children, without choice, without plan, without direction or purpose, will flee. The species will return to the countryside in search of freedom. Small villages will again prosper. Once more, families will know each other. Neighbors will become as tribal members and will again care for each other. There, as with primitive man, the issue will not be death, but life. The bridge from death to life is built on two tracks. One is the awareness that life is there to live, that life is. The other is the courage to live it, to feel fear, to accept pain, to set the fear of dying against the joy of living. Once life has been slightly perceived, once vaguely experienced, all the boxes, all the concrete cannot extinguish man's quest for it. That critical, irrepressible yearning, the longing to be free, to be, is at the heart of all that live. The late blooming bluebell hugs the ground. It clings to the earth's warmth in order to bloom and seed before the winter's freeze sets in. We are touched by the courage of the tender flower, but freedom is born of courage. In the end, life demands the same courage for living as it does for dying. Every soul who has occupied space upon the face of the earth, no matter how fearful of death, at last musters the courage to die. The courage to live and the courage to die are opposite sides of the same hand. Fear and joy are the opposite sides of the same hand. The hand is life and the hand is death. It is the hand of freedom. It is our hand, the hand that at last can spring the invisible trap. We define insanity as a disassociation from reality. Accordingly, we are insane. Existing in nearly total fantasy, we murder each other over imaginary icons and destroy entire segments of our societies over beliefs founded in myth. We instruct our offspring that various myths are fact, that certain fables are historically true, that diverse fictions and fairy tales must be believed, thereby rendering entire populations, by definition, mad. We have demonstrated that insanity can be taught, that the psychosis that predominates the earth is, in major part, a phenomenon of programming, a process we understand metaphorically as brainwashing. Admitting only for argument's sake that we are indeed suffering from some sort of bizarre social psychosis, this gives no consideration whatever to freedom and the effect its enjoyment or its deprivation has on the human condition. For if the body of human desire is the pursuit of happiness, freedom is its soul. Yet, is freedom either a definable or useful social notion? The term freedom eludes precise definition, for what seems to be freedom for some becomes tyranny for others. Yet, quite inexplicably, we fight for freedom, die for it, make speeches about it, and even celebrate a day in its honor, all the while understanding little, if anything, about this elusive notion. Moreover, many believe they are free when, in fact, they are bound in the most abject servitude imaginable. But if we suffer a form of psychosis we have been taught, our religions of politics and of God, then may not such teaching also be untaught? If the brain can be soaked in the brine of myth and madness, may it not also be soaked in clear, pure waters of truth and enlightenment? At last, does not freedom begin with a mind washed of beliefs? For if we believe in the teaching of one demagogue, have we not locked the door to all other possibilities? At last, does not any belief become an encroachment, extract from us our right to choose, and therefore diminish our freedom? At last, the world is full of either believers who have no proof, or doubters who, having proof, disbelieve it. Non-believers, the heretics of history, were burned at the stake. In America, today's heretics, those who refuse to accept the religion of free enterprise, are burned otherwise, usually with labels that serve the purpose of modern inquisitors just fine. Our miscreants are labeled as far left, commies, tax and spend liberals, tree huggers, and the like. The labels ostracize, and although we no longer burn our dissidents at the stake, our method of eliminating them is as effective. If candidates for public office raise issues that threaten the power structure, we unearth the women to whom they have made love and expose them as lechers and liars. If people oppose the power base by rioting, they are imprisoned. If they oppose the power base by passive resistance, such as those who refuse to pay taxes on moral grounds, they are also imprisoned. If people wish to expose the corporate oligarchy for its crimes, the ones it commits against the people, they are silenced, usually not by violence, although Karen Silkwood's fate seemed an exception, but simply by isolating them from the public media, so that the rest of the people are not permitted to hear them. As in the days of the Inquisition, the crime is still heresy, and the punishment is still banishment, if not by death, by separation from the community and nation. The power of the system to banish its aberrant members is usually rooted in the belief system of the majority. 1 million women in history could not have been burned at the stake, absent a culture's insane belief in witches. In our time, a nation of women could not be subjugated by a male-dominated society, but for an equally insane belief in the exclusive right of men to wield power. Hitler's insanity could not have been imposed on millions, but for the insane support, passive or otherwise, of an entire nation. Worldwide, it is a chilling spectacle to witness hundreds of millions of people clutching opposing economic and political dogmas, both of which tend to enslave their subjects. Consider our enslavement by the controlling entities called corporations. These entities are not alive. They do not breathe, or feel, or physically exist. These corporations appear to have no life as we understand life. They seem interested in but one thing, a lifeless paper symbol that measures the worth of all things and all people. A symbol called money. Although corporations do not breathe, they breathe money. Although they have no blood, their blood is money. Although they have no brains, they think money. And although they have no visible mouths, they speak only in terms of money. Although corporations do not live, their lives are devoted to the gathering of money. And although they are soulless, their souls are composed totally of money. It remains an enigma that any but the insane could devote the labor of their entire lives to such non-beings. By means of the corporate-owned media, closely censored information is disseminated that portrays the corporate oligarchy as honest and just, and also convinces the people it is proper for non-living entities to own or control the entire wealth of the earth, while the living should be allowed only that which trickles down. Americans have always suffered a severe emotional allergy to the idea of a monarchy, the evil said to have prompted the American Revolution itself. Yet today, America is governed by a non-living conglomerate of corporations, an oligarchy of mammoth corporations, a new king. We are assured from birth, until we draw our last raspy mortal breath, that we are a democracy, a vital but mythological part of our belief system that we take on faith. Plato thought that a democracy was, quote, a charming form of government, full of variety and disorder, and dispensing a sort of equality to equals and unequals alike, unquote. But Plato would not have been as amused were he to visit America. Here he would have discovered a rather orderly, compliant people, bemoaning the fact that there is still not sufficient order and compliance. He would, to his dismay, see that the only place people are in actual control is in the streets, where ruffians and gangs predominate, while elsewhere the corporate collective controls. He would fail to recognize our government as a democracy, but would view it as a sort of hybrid, exhibiting all of the elements of anarchy one day, those of fascism the next, a government that sounds like a democracy at election time and operates during the rest of the year as a capitalistic oligarchy through endless government and corporate bureaucracies. He would see a gaudy patchwork quilt that creates a state never before seen, heard of, or imagined in the history of humankind. In this crazy quilt, the aristocracy is the aristocracy of old money, of inherited wealth. That is the American equivalent of inherited titles. The quilt has its socialistic patch, evidenced by Medicare, workmen's compensation, and Social Security. It displays a patch of the monarchy, in that the underlying near absolute control of the nation is handed down from generation to generation of banks. On this crazy quilt, Plato would clearly see a patch that looks and feels like communism, since the major functions of the government are, as in the communist nations, operated by deeply embedded, hopelessly entangled bureaus where nothing is accomplished because the function of the bureau is to intercept every living idea and to smother it. To be sure, Plato would recognize a democratic patch as well. It forms a bright star in the center of the quilt, but its function is mostly to provide the rhetoric enjoyed on the 4th of July and during election years, when then, and only then, the people are courted and coddled and told how important they are. Franklin Roosevelt warned that, quote, the liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism, ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or any controlling private power, unquote. Upon such evidence, democracy seems to be a fine form of government, so long as the people do not engage in it. In place of a democracy, we have accepted as an article of faith that we live in one. In order for corporate power to remain in power, the illusion of freedom is crucial, and lip service is therefore faithfully given to the democratic ideal as surely as the priest kisses the holy chalice. The seemingly incurable affliction of democracy is that, as practiced, it has not succeeded in delivering democracy. We elect a new president or install another party not because the people independently have chosen to exercise their power, but because the new king has not been prospering. Whereas the beneficence of the king only dribbles down, his misery is shared by the buckets full. When the new king suffers, there is all hell to pay. He clears his court. People are laid off by the millions, usually at Christmas time. The streets are filled with the confused, the wandering, and the helpless. Still the people turn to the king and listen to the king, who incites their passions not against himself, of course, but against the king's men, the politicians. That the king can do no wrong is at the heart of English common law. And although the English kings have delivered their thrones to the museums, the idea of sovereign infallibility, when the sovereign is the nation's capitalist central nervous system, is still deeply embedded in America. Today we live in a world where all we encounter are potential predators, not members of our flock. Our leaders are liars and cheats, our representatives bought and sold, our bankers crooks, our clergy money-hungry charlatans, our businessmen frauds, our screen heroes deviates and dopeheads, our neighbors robbers and murderers, and then, of course, there are judges and lawyers. Our judges, with a few glaring exceptions, loyally serve the new king, the corporate core, whose money and influence are responsible for their office. Indeed, a few judges are actually enlightened, even idealistic, largely guided by human conscience. But one is hard-pressed to find a judge these days who is not a former prosecutor of the people, or a former corporate attorney who, as a judge, takes his experience, his loyalties, his training, and his prejudices with him when he is elevated to that high place. Show me a man who, as a lawyer, made his fortune in service to corporate clients, and I will show you a man who, as a judge, exhibits a mind and soul still bent in the same direction. One cannot feed from the corporate trough for 30 years without developing a certain predictable kink in the judicial neck. Lawyers are the only profession dedicated to preserving our freedom, although they are not very good at it. Populated by professors who are themselves unskilled in the trial of cases, law schools teach the law like one who teaches cooking, but who has never fried a flapjack. Law schools turn out thousands of lawyers each year, most of whom have never seen a contract, never drawn a will, never filed a simple petition in bankruptcy, and never drafted a complaint for divorce. Rather than deploying the best and the brightest into the far nooks and crannies to protect us from the tyranny that threatens us, our best and brightest are sold to the highest bidder among the large law firms who, after retraining them in any of hundreds of legal subspecialties, unloose them, together with others of their kind, against the people in much the same way that hounds are turned after the rabbit. If there is one thing that is obviously wrong in America today, it is the endless flooding of our country with young lawyers who are dumped on the public, sorely lacking any experience in the true skills of lawyering for the people. So then, once tribal animals, we have lost the security of the tribe. We no longer enjoy the comfort of our families, who have been scattered across the land in search of employment. Paranoid, terrorized, and alone, we scurry and hide in the concrete jungles, while the king further convinces us with the king's television voice that our true enemies are ourselves. Witnessing the reported and dramatized crimes of our species against ourselves, we rarely obtain a clear view of the crimes of the king against us. As estimated by the Bureau of National Affairs, the dollar cost of corporate crime in America is over 10 times greater than the combined larcenies, thefts, robberies, and burglaries committed by individuals. Since the saving and loan scandals, that estimate has more than doubled. If a child is born in misery and filth and grows up to commit miserable and filthy deeds, the child is punished for his misfortune at birth by being imprisoned in even filthier and more miserable cages called penitentiaries. If a member of a hungry minority robs a grocery store, he too is cast into one of these infamous places. But if a corporate bank robs the people of their life savings and squanders billions of their dollars, nothing happens to the bank at all. Instead, if the bank fails, we are required to save it by contributing more of our life's earnings to it through taxes. The real crimes of corporate America are not crimes punishable by law, because the corporate power nucleus does not tolerate laws that unduly inhibit its quest for profit. Therefore, corporations have remained free to convince our young that it is hip and in to smoke, thus ensuring the costly and agonizing deaths of generation after generation, while other corporations profit from the care of the victims in corporate hospitals at exorbitant prices. Corporations spill their oil on the land and in our oceans and mock the people when called upon to make restitution. As public utilities, they overcharge their customers. When a corporation's crime is discovered and the corporation sued, secret court settlements allow the offending corporation to continue to take its profit from the same killer products that brought them to court in the first place. If we were to profit from killing another person, we would be treated as killers for hire and executed. But when the corporation kills for its profit, rarely is anyone punished.
This is the end of Side 3. Please turn over the tape for proper cueing of Side 4.